Hello, everyone in the room in Amman and online. We are very pleased to welcome you to the Data Collection webinar series organized by the Data Collection Unit at UNICEF headquarters. My name is Archana Dwivedi and I work with the Data Collection Unit. Today, we have a very special webinar. We are going to be going live to the Mix workshop in Amman, where we'll be discussing the Mix 7 questionnaire, architecture, and content. Just a few housekeeping rules. We have about an hour today, including Q&A. Questions will be taken from participants at the workshop itself, as well as online posted in the chat. Bo Pedersen and Turgay Unalan will be facilitating the Q&A, and they are both with the Data Collection Unit at UNICEF. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on the UNICEF SharePoint site, together with past webinars. We will also post recordings onto the Mix YouTube channel, and so they are publicly available. You can find the links to both of these in the email that you were received. So without further ado, we are very excited to have with us Attila Hancioglu, Chief of the Data Collection Unit, also the Global Coordinator for the Multiple Indicator Cluster Surveys from the Data Analytics section from UNICEF New York. So Attila, I'm going to pass it on to you live from Amman.
Thank you very much, Archana. And hello once again, everyone. I will be talking about the architecture, the questionnaire architecture and content of Mix 7 in this session. So, as you all know, in the Mix program, our starting point in every round is to start with a standard set of indicators. And then, around those indicators, we create standard questionnaires that are able to generate data for these standard indicators. In addition to these indicators and questionnaires that go with them, we also have a number of tools to plan, to design, to implement, to report, to analyze data. So this makes up the whole standard tools that we provide to all the participating countries. This is what's on offer from the program to the countries. And then these get customized at the country level and get implemented in a customized fashion. So in previous rounds, the content of Mix, the content of the standard was largely based on consultations with interagency partners, other partners, with countries, and depended on a large number of factors, like those that you see on the screen. For instance, what is the global standards at that point in time? What are the best practices in measurements? Or what is the demand from countries? Is there SDGs, for instance, that countries want to measure, which are really topics which would go well in a mixed questionnaire? Not any topic, but topics which would fit well with the mix. We would look at indicators which are relevant to children's well-being, or we would always think when populating the content of the standard questionnaires, we would always bear in mind continuity with the previous rounds. We don't want to, if possible, we don't want to change an indicator completely and then you got cut off. You get cut off into your trends. It's not always possible. We will try to do it as much as possible. We try to get indicators and content into these questionnaires which are consistent with our basic vision, right? They have to be indicators related to children as much as possible. They have to be indicators that can be measured in household surveys, not any indicator, which can normally come from another source, but not necessarily a household survey. And above all, we look at the following: whether what we're including in Mix is going to be able to produce good quality data. Has it been tested, validated? Do we know, do we have guarantees almost that we're going to have good data out of it? You are going to have good data out of it. So we always operate at the beginning of each round on the basis of these factors when deciding what the content of Mix in that round is going to. But let me tell you some background so that you understand why we have landed now, which I will talk later about, why we have landed on a slightly different architecture in terms of the way that we offer all of these to you in this round. When we were going from mix 5 to mix 6, we had a major effort to align mix to SDGs. We are talking about the time when the SDG indicators, the global SDG indicators, were just being identified. I'm talking 2016, 2015, 2017, thereabouts, in those years. Mix 6 started the mix in 2017. So the global indicators came out at about the same time. So we knew what the content was going to be. So we tried our best to align the content of Mix 6 as much as possible to the upcoming SDGs, because we knew that it was going to be really big for all the countries. We took into account some emerging issues, and as a result, all the questionnaires were expanded. We had many new topics and modules. And at the same time, we started working on some new work streams, some of which you are going to see now in this workshop. For instance, Mix Plus, Mix Link, those kind of things. Now, as a result of all of this, we had an expansion of the number of indicators in Mix 6 compared to Mix 5. We had 60 topics in Mix 6. Of these, 19 were new. So that's a third, which is huge. And this included things like water quality testing, which involves testing of water, as the name suggests, which has logistical implications. It included foundational learning skills, which involve talking to children directly. We had a brand new questionnaire for ages 5 to 17. We didn't have 5 to 17 questionnaires before. We accommodated a lot of SDG indicators as a result. As I mentioned earlier, 33 to be precise. We also not only increased the number of indicators, but we also expanded the number of disaggregates. We started child functioning, we started migration, we started a number of new disaggregates because, as you know, SDGs are big on disaggregates. As if this was not enough, the sample sizes of mixed surveys increased by 30%, from mix 5 to mix 6. And as I mentioned earlier, we started to work on several new initiatives. So our ambitions grew exponentially in mix 6. We ended up with something which was really, really big. When we were coming towards the end of mix 6, and we were considering how we're going to move into transition into mix 7, we started to take into account many factors, as you can imagine. We wanted to continue to address emerging issues. Of course, there's new things which didn't exist 5, 6 years ago, new areas of interest. But we also wanted to keep those topics which were important. There were still SDGs. We're still in the SDG era. Those indicators, SDG indicators, which we included in Mix 6, are still as important as ever. So while taking into account new things, we wanted to retain old things. And we also wanted to meet new country demands in doing so too. And on top of everything else, since we had started piloting these new initiatives, the Mix Plus, the Mix Link, Mix GIS, etc., we wanted to mainstream those in Mix 7. Again, as all of this implies, I'm sure, an expansion, further expansion of everything that we're doing. This is the growth of this program. So we thought we cannot really tolerate this expansion if we don't change our so-called business model a little bit. Because we thought we definitely need to shorten and simplify questionnaires. Is that possible? Because we want to retain all topics and include new topics. How are we going to do that? Because we knew that we have to reduce the burden on the respondents as well as on us and on you. But we have to add new indicators. We want to continue to manage and improve data quality while doing all of this. We need to do faster turnaround and dissemination. As I gave the example earlier, we have to come up with the results of the survey as quickly as possible once we finish the data collection. And in addition to all of these, we have to continue innovating and modernizing. New technologies, new indicators, testing, piloting, field testing, all of them. So as you can see, what we had on our plate was huge. One of the solutions that we have found to this, we hope, has been to change the architecture of the standard questions. And this is going to be my topic in the next few minutes. Now, going back to Mix 6, not all of you have participated in Mix 6, not everyone online knows about Mix 6, but this is the way that we used to run Mix 6 and Mix 5 and before. We would have one set of questionnaires with standard modules in them. In the case of Mix 6, sorry, it was the household questionnaire, the women's questionnaire, the men's questionnaire, the questionnaire for children 5 to 17, and the under 5 questionnaire. Right? 5 questionnaires. And we would have modules in them. Modules meaning topics, formatted in the shape of a module. Like we would have contraception in women, or we would have diarrhea in under 5, or we would have social transfers in household questionnaire, etc. Different topics in each of these questionnaires. And we would offer all of these to you, to the countries. We would offer to you one set of standards, everything included. And then countries would take these and customize them at the country level. They would take some of those modules out because they don't need them. They're not interested. That issue doesn't exist in the country, it's specific to other countries. Or there's data from another source, they don't need the data. For any reason, countries would take out those modules, and then sometimes they would add country-specific modules which do not exist in the standard questionnaires. This is how Mix 6 ran in terms of what we offer to you, how you take it, how you customize it, and how you finalize and implement it, in other words. Now in Mix 7, this is what we are landing. We still have the same 5 questionnaires. Household, women, men, 5 to 17, and under 5. We have created these 5 questionnaires, but with much shorter content. They are much smaller questionnaires now. I will come to how we populated these, how we decided the content of these. But from now on, in Mix 7, we are going to have 5 questionnaires with 5 short questionnaires with some topics which are applicable in all settings, that everyone will want to collect data on, almost. And all of these modules, we will see during the course of this workshop and a little bit later too, all of these topics are actually topics which existed already in Mix 6. So there's nothing new in the short base questionnaires. All the remaining Mix 6 topics that we had before, that we are continuing to use now, as well as any new topic that we have come up with, are now going to be placed in what we call complementary topic packages. They're going to be complementary. These, in other words, let me repeat. These are topics which were already in Mix 6, plus those which are new, which are now ready. Some of them you are going to see in this workshop. Some of them are forthcoming in the next year or so. Why did we do this? And what are we trying to get out of this? I'll tell you. We want to encourage you to do the following if you're starting a new mix process. It's up to you completely. This is just an encouragement from our side, and I'll tell you why in a minute. we want to encourage you to start with the base questionnaires, the standard base questionnaires. See if there's anything that you don't need there. Of course, you can take them out. It's not, it's not a low or anything. If there's anything that you don't need from the base questionnaire module, take them out, of course. But start small with the base questionnaires. And then start building your questionnaires, country questionnaires, from there by adding complementary topics that you want to add. And I'll tell you why we did this. Because we want to encourage you, the countries, to have quality time discussions at the country level in deciding which of those complementary topics should be added to the base questions. Because of the following reason. I said earlier that in Mix 6 we were providing you one set of questionnaires with everything in them. We have been finding out consistently that excluding anything from those questionnaires has been proven to be very, very difficult. Not everyone, many countries were taking all these questionnaires, many modules in them, and they were not taking anything out. Or they were taking very few things out, which meant that the questionnaires implemented at the country level were huge in most cases, which has an inverse relationship with data quality. That's why we are trying to encourage. That's why we are trying to actually avoid. So we encourage you to start small, look at those complementary topics, work with everyone else, your ministries, the line ministries, your partners, your donors, and I will say something more about that, and then add those as you want to. What we were providing before, and I used to make this analogy, so for those of you who have heard this before from me, my apologies. But I used to say in Mix 6, we have all these questionnaires and all these topics, many, many topics in them. Think of a menu when you go to a restaurant. You're not supposed to be eating everything on the menu. You choose what to eat. But in many cases, unfortunately, all the restaurant menu was being consumed at the country level, which doesn't work. It will get your stomach upset, right? In our terms, bad data quality. The other reason why we have landed on this is because we have been taken for granted. Everyone takes you for granted. No one wants to go into a discussion because everyone knows that X, Y, Z topics are already in the questionnaires, they're being implemented, so there's no discussion, it's already there. But when it comes to partners providing support, it might be financial support, it might be your line ministries providing support, it might include financial support. I think this kind of logic or approach or architecture may actually trigger good discussions on what kind of support needs to be provided so that those complementary topics can be added to the base question. So we're creating a discussion platform by encouraging you to do this. Now for all of this, there's something of a supporting tool that we have created, which is that we have now calculations, and I think I'm going to show it in a few days. We have now calculations, we have created some methodology that we assign, we have calculated scores that refer to the units of effort that you need to include any topic in mix questionnaires. So in other words, if you want to include violence against women, you need 1,000 units of effort. If you want to include something very simple, you want to include child discipline, for instance, you need to spend 500 units of effort. The burden, in other words, how much you're taking on by including that topic into your questions. So that's also going to be available, and we can discuss that more. And documentation on that is going to be on the website later. So how do we decide on the contents of these base questionnaire topics and what goes into complementary topics? How do we decide? We try to use an objective scoring system, an approach for this. We said we have to consider topics in mix 6. We have to consider topics that were added at the country level. They seem to be popular. Although they were not part of standard mix, we have to consider those. And we have to consider some new topics. So we took all of these together. I think there were 98 in total. And then we created a scoring system. We thought, let's score these objectively, how important they are, how relevant they are, on the basis of 5 dimensions. And these are the 5 dimensions that you see on the screen. SDG. Does the topic create SDGs? Many SDGs. Are there important SDGs? Is there interest and commitment within UNICEF? Not because it's UNICEF, but because it is the leading organization of the world on children's concern. That's why it is UNICEF. It's not because it's UNICEF only. So it's an indicator of the importance of the topic in the world of children. Is there global support and interest to the topic? Is it big now? Is there country interest? That was another dimension. And the 5th dimension was, if we have to include that topic in a mixed questionnaire, then how likely are we to get the good data quality? So we took those 5 dimensions. We gave weights to them. You know weights, right, as data people, because some are more important than the others. And then we landed on the following. In the base questionnaires, we put those topics which were high scoring, mixed 6 topics which were of global interest, global relevance. In the complementary topics, those packages that you will see during this workshop and later on the website, we put those topics of relevance which are only relevant to certain countries, regions, but they are very important, like female genital mutilation, which is prevalent in some parts of the globe, or malaria, which is very important in some parts, but not in other parts. Those kinds of topics went into complementary topics. The second group there was new topics which scored high, like time use, for instance. We will come to those topics. And we made sure that we were not dropping anything which is an SDG or which is part of the UNICEF's strategic plan indicator list. Again, as an indication of what's important in the world of children. We eliminated only a handful of topics. And those topics were those which were low scoring, did not generate SDGs or strategic plan indicators of UNICEF, and did not have strong support from the countries or demand from the countries or globally. Only a handful of topics which were in mix 6 have now been dropped or eliminated, are not going to be in as part of the mix 7 package of. This is not the end of the story. This is mix 6, mix 7 we are starting this year. This will run until 2026. This scoring we will repeat every year. And with this new, with scoring every year, placing of these topics might change. So the standard questionnaires, the base questionnaires, and the complementary topics will be changeable through this mix 7. In the old days, we would start around mix 6, for instance, in 2017, and we would almost change nothing until the end of that round. Now it is different. Because also, we are going to be progressively developing new indicators. There's going to be many new indicators developing this year. So by the end of the year, we will score them and we will include them in the standard questionnaires. So what is resulting? And this is in this workshop. This is the first time you're seeing this online. We have actually presented this several times in webinar and meetings. And this is the resulting architecture and content that we have. We have these base questionnaires. And I'm not going to go into the details of each of these one by one. As you can see, they're all in white fonts. White fonts means that they are not new. They existed before. They're high scoring, mixed 6 topics, which are of global relevance. They're the usual suspects. They're machines producing SDG indicators, strategic plan indicators. Most of them you would all want to have. Not all of them, but most of these indicators would be important for all countries. Early childhood development or sanitation, early grade skills, otherwise known as the foundational learning skills in the old days, or antenatal care, delivery care. Those are all part of these base questionnaires. These are short questionnaires by any measure. So I'm not saying anything like, please go ahead and do your survey based on these base questionnaires only. That's not the intention. That's one. This is not a hierarchical structure. In other words, it doesn't mean that base questionnaires, those topics in the base questionnaires, are more important than the complementary topics. It doesn't say that at all. In fact, you are supposed to be, we are encouraging you to look at those complementary topics and choose from them. It also doesn't mean that anything that you don't like here, you cannot take out. You don't need information on immunization, for instance. You can take out the immunization module, of course. But then we encourage you to go to the complementary topics and go through them, but have quality time discussions among yourselves, with your partners, with donor agencies, with us, with everyone, and decide what to include, to add from the complementary topics onto the base questions. This is a simple architectural platform that we are providing to you that we hope you can follow. It's not a rule, but if you follow, I think we're going to end up having, hopefully, shorter questionnaires on the average at the country level. These are the complementary topics. Some of the, there's two more pages. The ones that you see in yellow are new to Mix 7. They include post-emergency, food insecurity, also known as FIAS module. We have employment and training, pregnancy loss. We're extending anthropometric measurements from 0 to 4 to 5 to 9. We have time use for children. These are all new topics. The others, in white font, are all topics which we used to have in mixes. That was the first page. This is the second page. We have HPV and time use for women this time, for the women's questionnaire and men's questionnaire. And the men, women, because we have the largest number of topics in those two questionnaires. Then we have decision-making on reproductive health, mental health for 15 to 24-year-old men and women, adolescents and youth, and we have violence against women. These are the contents of the complement-based questionnaires and the complementary topics. Now, that's not all, because we have decided that in this round, as I mentioned earlier, we are going to be progressively adding new topics onto these questionnaires and making them available as they are finally tested. We have put the final stamp on them. They're tested, validated, and we are able to offer them to you. These are, in other words, what we call complementary topics in the pipeline. They are about to be made available to you. They include all the topics that you see on the screen, from material housing deprivation to displacement to child food security to bullying to blood lead level testing, etc. Quite a few topics. Some of these need just a few very small tweaks, which will happen in the next couple of months. Some of these are going to be ready towards the end of the year. Maybe one or two will be ready early next year, but they're imminent. Many of them are actually ready. We had discussions whether to present them as if they're ready here or not, but we decided not to. We want to put the final, stamp on it. And these are all going to go into the set of complementary topics when we are we have finalized. And that is my presentation on questionnaire architecture and content. Thank you. Okay, now we can take questions from the room, as well as my colleagues, Bo and Turgay, are going to support me to read, to scan the questions in the chat box or the webinar, and they're going to direct those questions to me as well. Any questions from the room? Let's start with the room. One question in English, Turkish? Sorry, Arabic? English. Because we spoke some Turkish this morning, that's why.
Okay, thank you so much, Attila, for the comprehensive presentation. I'm happy with the design, the new design of Mix and the architecture. Just one concern, of course, as you mentioned, in the complementary, let's say, topics, we have an important, very important subjects like birth registration. We do have child functionality. Hopefully, I mean, the country offices and also the government will take into consideration the complementary, not just to just focus on the let's say the basic questions and don't pay too much attention to the complementary. Although you have emphasized that we need to go through the complementary indicators as they are also for this survey. So this is just I'm a bit I mean, not a matter of, but something a kind of risk maybe. We need to be a bit careful about the utilization.
I absolutely agree with you. I'm not sure if everyone heard. The question is, hopefully, governments are not going to just pay attention to base questionnaires, but also to the complementary topics equally, because they're important topics among the complementary topics too. And I certainly hope that that's going to be the case, absolutely. It's not like the base questionnaire topics are Premier League, I'm talking football terms now, and the complementary topics are the first. They are the same in terms of their importance. It's just that they have scored differently, and we had to populate the base questionnaires in such a way that we can encourage that discussion at the country level. As I said earlier, you can actually disregard some of the base questionnaire topics too. It's absolutely your choices to be made. But we think that if you follow this, more or less, then it will encourage a lot of good quality discussion. We might end up not populating the questionnaires with everything on the face of the earth and suddenly come up with questionnaires which are going to be too large to be managed properly. Any other questions? One question here. English,
yeah.
I think.
Yeah, thank you so much, Attila. Actually, I have one question and one suggestion maybe. For the question in the slide, when you presented the factors incorporated to have the new structure, like the basic and the complementary, there was one figure, like these factors were over 17 indicators. I didn't get what these 17 indicators are referring to. And the suggestion is under the complementary topics or modules, you highlighted these new modules, but with high score. If we can also highlight those SDGs which were under the complementary, not under the, because the second category include two issues, like the newly topics but with high score and those SDGs which are not under the first category, the basic one.
Sure, we can.
Thank you.
We actually have in our indicator list, there's going to be a full indicator list, as you know. The way that we are arranging the indicator list is going to be base questionnaire indicators and the complementary topic indicators, and there it is very clearly indicated which indicators are SDGs, which indicators are not. So that's possible. The 17 indicators, I did not list them here. I listed only the 5 dimensions, so each of those 5 dimensions have a number of indicators under them. It would be too much detail, I didn't list them here, but they're indicators like for the 5th dimension, for instance, mixed data quality concerns. Is it long? Does it produce good quality data? Is it does it have burden on the respondent, etc. On the SDG dimension, does it produce an SDG indicator? If it does, how many SDG indicators? So there are different indicators which are of equal weight. So we added them all up, but by assigning weights to each of the dimensions, we came up with some weighted sums for each of the topics, and that's how we finalized them. I must say the following. This has been a very, very objective exercise. So we made sure that only 2 of us was doing this. So we didn't involve everyone in the team, only 2 of us, just to ensure consistency. And then when we scored, we made sure that we were not using our affinity or relationship with any of the topics and the indicators. And in fact, some of the topics that I have for many years been a very big fan of are now eliminated. So it has been as objective as possible. But once we completed the scoring, we actually consulted a number of others to check some of the indicators. For instance, some colleagues in the management in UNICEF would know overall better than us, maybe we thought, the importance given to these indicator topics at the higher level. So we consulted them, but it was only consultations. Any other questions? I think. Let me go to the chat box and then come back to the room. I think.
That's the nicest thing I've ever been called, I think. I have 5 questions that we've answered a few of them, Turga and I. If I start from the top, the first question is adding a question treated as adding a new module in the scoring system? Do you understand that?
No. Can you repeat that, please?
Is adding a question the same as adding a module in the scoring? Is there, I guess, it means whether or not we take into account how many questions are needed to cover a certain topic.
Yes, we do. There's a conversion of the topic into the questionnaire, of course. The question is, do we take into consideration the number of questions that are needed for each topic? Yes, we do. So what we have scored is on the basis of the topics themselves. But when we are looking at the topics, we know the number of questions and the length with which we are going to be able to cover the topic. So they came into the picture too. That's how we scored it. One more question, I think.
Oh, I have many more.
You have many more? Okay.
Since you just mentioned it, do we have any estimates of how long it would take to do interviews with the full content of the Mix 7 package?
The question is, do we have any estimates of how long it would take to implement like a whole base questionnaire package, for instance, or all the complementary topics? So, do we have good measures of how long it takes, in other words? It's yes and no. Yes, in respect to the following. We globally test and pilot some of these topics. So for some topics, we have good estimates of how long it takes to implement them. But the real measures actually come from your own pre-tests at the country level, because we ask you all, as part of the standard methodology, to pre-test the questionnaires. But overall, I think it's quite difficult to have very precise measures of how long a questionnaire is taking. We want to make progress on that by creating some paradata, what they call paradata, because we have now tablets. All the interviews are made on the tablet, so we can actually measure those. But it's difficult. It's not very precise measurement, because an interviewer goes to the household, sits and starts to interview the person, but then the person says, "Let me put the kettle on and then come back." How do you count that? You know, it becomes a little bit of a problematic measure. So, but there are ways to deal with it statistically, of course, and we do have some of those numbers. We have not published them yet, but we do have some of those numbers. Maybe I can go back to the room and then come back to you if we have time, of course. I don't know. I have no idea of the time.
You have 6 minutes.
We have 6 minutes. Okay, one more question from the room. Maybe I will go to government counterparts here.
I will speak in Arabic.
Arabic, okay.
شكرا سيد أتيلا على الشرح الوافي والتفصيلي اللي حضرتك قدمته لنا. أكرر شكري لحضرتك على العرض اللي قدمته حضرتك. من خلال العرض اللي حضرتك قدمته أود أن أستفسر على موضوع. أنتم قسمتوا استمارة ميكس إلى قديم ميكس 6 مع إضافات جديدة باللون الأصفر اللي حضرتك أشرت عليها. وإحنا معروف أنه ميكس هو كل 4 سنين، أو الدورة تكاد تكون من 4 إلى 5 سنوات. هل هذا بمعنى أنه إذا هالسنة العراق قدم مقترح أنه قابل ينفذ ميكس 7 لهذا العام، لكن ما عندي الإمكانية أنه أضيف أي مؤشرات جديدة من ناحية بسبب عدة أوضاع، مثلا خلينا نقول الدعم المادي أو الدعم اللوجستي اللي أقدر أوفر الكادر الكامل لتنفيذ أكبر قدر ممكن. أكيد منظمة اليونيسيف تحاول أنه تجمع أكثر قدر ممكن من المؤشرات خلال الدورة الواحدة. هل هذا بمعنى أنه القاعدة البيانات أو المؤشرات الجديدة هي حتكون متاحة السنة اللي بعدها بحيث تفقد الدورية مالتها؟ يعني أنا السنة القادمة، سؤالي بسيط وواضح، هل بمعنى أقدر استطيع السنة القادمة أنه أنفذ التكميلي لهذه المؤشرات؟ وبالتالي كيف حتكون دوريتها؟ أنه كل سنة أقدر أقدم، حيكون الباكج جاهز، كل سنة أقدم مؤشرين جديد، 4 مؤشرات 5 مؤشرات جديدة، وبالتالي حتكون دورية سنوية وليست دورية 4 سنوات. هل هذا الشيء متاح يعني؟ شكرا.
It's okay. Let me translate the question to the online audience. The question is relating to when the complementary topics are going to be available, when they are available, depending on the time of the survey. Would it be possible to include them, add them to the survey, etc. Along those lines. So my answer would be the following. As I mentioned earlier, and let me give you an example. A good example that I can think of, something which is going to be ready. Displacements. There's a new module, new topic called displacement, which is about IDPs and refugees. It is more or less ready. It just needs a few tweaks, a few modifications, then we're going to release it. We already know where in the questionnaires, the standard questionnaires, we will see later, that displacement module will go into, right? So when we release it, we will say, here's a new package to the countries. You can include this in your survey now, depending on the timing of your survey. Now, if you are doing your survey now, this year, I cannot provide the displacement module to you now because it's not fully ready. But by next year, I can bet more or less that the displacement module is going to be ready. So it will depend completely on the timing of your survey. At each point, this is nothing different from the old times, by the way. For instance, we didn't have anything on time use of children when we started Mix 6. Now we are starting Mix 7 and we have it. If you had conducted a Mix 6, you didn't have the chance to include time use for children. But if you're conducting a Mix 7, you have the chance to include, because things get added and developed over time all the time. So you are never going to be covering everything possible. You are going to be always missing something. And that missing, what you're going to be missing is going to be things which are not available, which is just a normal, natural thing, right? Something which is going to become available later. You're not going to have them now, but when you do your survey later, you will be able to include that in your survey. Not you. You need to use a microphone, yeah. No, okay. Tell me. in another survey here. It's possible. Yeah, yeah. You can if you wish. If you have the resources, of course, you can. Maybe you will think now. Okay. Let me answer the question. The question is it possible to do, let's say, the base questionnaire now, and then in another survey next year, we do another survey, which now includes the complementary topics, so we continue to do surveys and cover all these topics. Is that good, George? Yes, it's up to resources. There are different options for doing this. Maybe we can also talk about Mix Plus tomorrow, when you may think of leaving some complementary topics to Mix Plus and not included in Mix, for example. Because doing a household survey every year, face-to-face household surveys, is costly. But if your data needs are more than what one mix can actually have, then you might think of other options. Absolutely.
اي
You have 15 minutes, Attila. Yes.
انا حتى لو كان مسح سنوي، انا ماذا اقصد انه الموضوع يكون من قبل اليونيسيف، بمعنى انه حتى لو كان في دعم حكومي من داخل الدولة تنظم هذا المسح سنويا بحيث تكمله لحين تكمل المؤشرات اللي التكميلية الجديدة. لكن هو حيكون يجب وجود دعم من المنظمة لإدخال البيانات، لأن هو في الأول والآخر هو نظام اليونيسيف، سواء كان النظام التقني أو النظام التحليلي. وبالتالي القصد أنه التكلفة المادية تتحملها الحكومة القطرية أو الوطنية، في حين أنه الدعم الفني يكون بإشراف من قبل اليونيسيف، لأنه إلا إذا الحكومة المحلية قامت بإجراء المسح وطنيا، فهل حيكون هناك اعتراف من اليونيسيف لهذه المؤشرات لو هي تحملت تنفيذه؟ شكرا.
Okay, UNICEF acknowledging or recognizing indicators and data is a completely different thing than mix. Because UNICEF uses a lot of data sources. We don't only use mix. Mix is only one data source. It is the flagship household survey program of UNICEF, but that's only one data source. So we get a lot of data from other sources, be it national, funded only by governments, be it surveys which are part of other global household survey programs like DHS or SMART. Those are all possibilities. But when doing so, I think there was a related question this morning, which was how does UNICEF make use of the data which is created at the country level? We have a certain system within UNICEF where the country level data goes up all the way to headquarters in the whole system, going through the regional office, the country offices, the headquarters. They are subjected to some data quality tests. And if they're good quality data, then of course we include them in our global databases. And then on behalf of the governments, we might be reporting them to the SDGs, for instance, as global indicators. The question was whether these additional surveys that can be done may be done by in the form of government-funded surveys or other surveys. That would be really good too. And we were having a discussion earlier today. If a country is not doing a mixed survey but doing another survey, we encourage them to add some of the mixed topics onto their surveys. That's perfectly possible and very much encouraged also. Bo, I think, from the chat box.
Yes, there's a question if we have a list of the topics that are no longer in mix.
So the question is there a list of topics which are no longer in mix? No, there's no such list. Of course, there's a list, and we're going to be mentioning them during this week. As I said before, there are a handful of topics. There are very few. One of them is tetanus toxoid, for instance. One of them is the attitude and behavior questions in relation to HIV/AIDS, etc. This doesn't mean that if a country, let me give you the example of HIV/AIDS. If a country is really interested in the HIV/AIDS module, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. We have erased it from the face of the earth, and we are not going to be supporting it for them. We will, but we are not, advocating. We are not using them big time in the workshops. They are still going to be with us. They are still going to be dependent on mixed 6 methodology. If a country wants to look at the mixed 6 and say, oh, the HIV/AIDS is a priority in my country, we want to collect this data. It used to be a mixed 6, but not a mixed 7. We want this in our mixed 7 survey. That's perfectly possible too. No problem whatsoever. Okay, one question, I think. Let me go to the Somalia-Egypt table. The question is about to be asked by our friend from Somalia. I'm sure. Okay, your second question, can you repeat your second question? You gave the example of fires, I think. You gave the example of food insecurity experience, right? What? In other surveys? Yeah, absolutely, you can. Yeah, please do so. Okay, I'll repeat the question. There were two questions. The question was, I had mentioned that the sample sizing is increased from mix 5 to mix 6, and what was it increase about? How much it increased, I will tell you. And the second question was, if in the case of a module such as a topic such as the food insecurity experience, for instance, which can be collected from other surveys, in other types of surveys, why not leave it to the other surveys? Absolutely. I will start with the second question. That's where customization comes in, you see. We tell you that these are the standard questionnaires, and if there's anything in them which has been in another survey or is likely to be added to another survey, don't include it in mix. This is one shortening the questionnaires. If you have done a smart survey 1 month ago, 2 months ago, which collected nutrition information, you might say, we don't want to do anthropometry in the survey. Absolutely the case. But if it so happens that you don't have another survey or another data source which has collected or is likely to collect data on fires, on food insecurity experience, then you have a choice to include it here. That's the logic of this. In terms of sample sizes, I think the average sample size of mix 6 was just in excess of 12,000 households, but with a huge variation across countries. We have surveys which are of sample size of 2,000, 2,500, but we had surveys at 40,000 too. So there's huge variation. In a way, I don't like to use the average sample size that much because of the variation behind it, right? But there has been an increase in the average sample size of the mixed surveys, starting from mix 3 actually, and it has been continuing that sample size increase. One more question, Fatma.
This is there for presentation. Thank you. Presentation was excellent, but
complementary work.
So it is done and it will how different put it into
Okay. The question, the next question from the room here, was about the new complementary topics which are being developed. It refers to a timetable with which it will be developed and how many countries would be participating to pilot them, to test them. Is that the correct interpretation of your question? Before publishing them on the website. Yeah. Each of those topics are at different levels of advancement. Some of them, as I mentioned, they have been tested, validated, and everything else. Just a few tweaks in a couple of questions will be necessary. There are a few that we are starting to work on, which we will need to work with partners to see if there will be countries to pilot them for us. But in this world of methodological testing, there's not a rule that says if you're developing a topic, you have to test it in X number of countries. It's a methodological, exercise. It has to satisfy you that you are coming up with robust data and validated data. And sometimes that might take 5, 6 different countries and different methodologies, both doing qualitative work as well as quantitative work, field testing, piloting, anthropological work sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't take that much. It depends on the length of the questionnaires too, right? Also to note that some of those new complementary topics in the pipeline are actually being tested by others, not us. So some of them, we wait for others to finalize their testing and tell us they're final. From our side, they're absolutely final, they're 100%. And then the only thing left for us can be mixification. In other words, taking them from somebody else and mixifying them. That's the verb that we have coined over the years. We mixify them, make it ours in our questionnaires. So it will depend on the topic, it will depend on how much work has gone into it so far and how much we need to work more on it. I have to go to the webinar, I think, and then come back here. Bo?
Yeah, there's a few questions, but one that you definitely can answer quickly is it allowed for countries to add anything to these surveys? Because our scoring has been only for our topics, the mixed topics. Can countries add other topics? Is it allowed?
The question is from the chat box. You have all heard it actually here. Is it possible to add new topics, additional topics which are not part of the base questionnaire or complementary topics that we are offering? Yes. We have a bad reputation, which is completely unfounded and wrong. Some people say, and they think of other survey programs who have that attitude, but we don't. Okay? Some people say, mix doesn't allow anything to be added. No, look at the questionnaires and you will see how much we allow to be added, which are not part of mix standards. But we have a concern. We want to make sure that what you're adding onto a mixed survey is tested and validated. You know what you are going to do with it. You know how to analyze it. You know what the indicator is. We don't want to use this huge investment as just for experimental research. It's too costly to do that. You have other priorities. So when a country comes to us and says, well, we'll start working with them, we want to include this X topic, which doesn't exist as part of mix. We say, okay, how are we going to analyze it? Who needs this data? What for? What is the indicator? What does the tabulation look like? We ask all these questions. And that's where I was mentioning this technical collaboration comes in. This is tech collaboration. We discuss them. And in many surveys, there are additional topics which are being added to the mixed survey once they have qualified with these, with this criteria. So it is the answer to the question is yes, it is possible, but we have to discuss to see what they are. Okay, are we about time today? I think we are about time.
Thank you, Attila, and thank you, participants in Amman, for allowing us to come and join your session today. So thank you all also for your questions from within the room as well as online. I just wanted to remind everybody that the next webinar will be taking place on May 24th, and the topic is how to define a city, lessons from the global rollout of the degree of urbanization. So another reminder that the presentations and recording will be available on the SharePoint site for our UNICEF colleagues and on the Mix YouTube channel for external. So with that, I want to thank you all again and wish you the best in the rest of your workshop in Amman. And we will see you next time. Bye, everybody.